Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we unpack complex ideas and really try to extract the essential nuggets of knowledge for you.
That's the goal.
Today, we're taking a fresh look at a figure most of us think we know, the Buddha. Perhaps you picture that serene, happy statue.
Or maybe the trendy marketing icon you see on, well, everything from yoga studios to fancy teas.
Right, that image.
And for many, the Buddha is almost godlike, omniscient, maybe superhuman. But our source material today, it's a fascinating deep dive from a psychologist's perspective, and it really challenges that popular image.
It does. It aims to separate his radical, original insights from all the religious traditions that kind of grew up around them over centuries.
Yeah, separating the core ideas from the religious baggage, you could say.
That's precisely our mission today. We're going to explore what we're calling the psychological Buddha. We want to strip away that interpretation to reveal these profound insights that are surprisingly relevant to modern psychology, to our understanding of the mind.
And the goal is to help you become truly well-informed on this often misunderstood figure, specifically through this lens of mind science.
Okay, so when we talk about the Buddha's original project, well, there's a huge contrast with how people often see Buddhism today, right?
Oh, absolutely. We think Zen, maybe Vajrayana rituals, mantras, tantras, deities even.
All that stuff.
But the sources we looked at suggest the Buddha's original teachings had very, very little of that.
So what was his focus then? What was the original project about?
It was far more introspective, much more pragmatic. I mean, sure, leaders like the Dalai Lama embody compassion and teach the Four Noble Truths, just as the Buddha did. That core is there. But the psychological Buddha, as we're framing him, he'd barely recognize a lot of what's done in his name today.
Really?
Yeah. He might appreciate that modern science is starting to confirm some of his observations about the mind, maybe find that quite interesting.
Okay.
But he'd likely be, well, dismayed by the sectarianism, the dogmatism, the persistent metaphysics that you find in much of religious Buddhism.
It's such an interesting paradox, though, isn't it? Our source points out this irony, that without those very corruptions, as some might call them.
We might not know anything about him at all.
Exactly. They ended up preserving his core insights, carrying them through millennia.
It's true. And the author of our main source, a psychologist, was once spiritually observant, now an atheistic skeptic. They specifically aimed to present this, well, iconoclastic version of the Buddha.
Stripped of the saintliness, the supernatural stuff.
Yes, and what's really clever about that approach is that when you look closely, the Buddhist teachings already are pretty secular, or they certainly appear to be.
How so?
Well, they don't really rely on divine intervention or supernatural beliefs. They're more like a direct, observable exploration of the human mind, something you can investigate for yourself.
Okay, let's dive into one of the Buddha's maybe the most famous declarations. He said, "I teach suffering and the end of suffering."
Right. Everyone knows that line.
But when we hear suffering, we immediately think, physical pain, deep sorrow, agony. Our source makes it really clear that suffering is actually a problematic translation for the Pali term dukkha.
It really is. It misses the pervasive quality, the subtlety of dukkha. It's often quite sneaky.
Sneaky?
Yeah. I mean, misery and agony are definitely part of it, sure. But dukkha is much broader. The source suggests alternatives like stress, dissatisfaction, dis-ease, anguish.
And none are quite right on their own?
None are complete, but they all point towards it. It's just too strong a word if it only means extreme pain. It's more like a fundamental sense of unease or unsatisfactoriness that just underlies things.
And then this is where his use of metaphor is just brilliant. The Buddha talked about dukkha as something being off, right? Like a broken axle or a bad wheel on an ox cart.
Exactly. The Pali word du can mean asunder or bad, and akka means axle. So dukkha, bad axle. It's an incredibly vivid image.
It really is. So unawakened life is like riding on that cart.
Pretty much. You're on this cart with a wobbly, broken axle. It doesn't really matter if the ride itself feels pleasant or painful in any given moment.
The underlying problem is still there.
Right. You're wobbling, bouncing along, even if the road seems smooth. And this metaphor connects to the wheel of life, too, where dukkha was sometimes used to refer to the hole where the axle should fit perfectly, but it doesn't quite because of ignorance. So life just doesn't run smoothly.
So the Buddha's goal then was to true the wheel, like fixing a bent bicycle wheel so it rolls smoothly again.
Precisely. To fix the axle, so to speak. It really reframes dukkha away from just acute agony towards this pervasive disease, this sort of constant underlying agitation.
Yeah, that feels relatable. Something many of us probably feel, even if we don't call it dukkha.
Mm.
Now, let's unpack another huge one, maybe one of the most radical concepts from this deep dive. Not self. Anatta in Pali. Anatman in Sanskrit.
Ah, yes, anatta. This is a tough one, especially for a Western audience.
Why is that?
Well, the whole idea of the self is so central, so cherished in our culture. It's like the main organizing principle for our psychology, our sense of identity.
You build everything around it.
We do, and so many people misunderstand anatta. They think the Buddha was saying selves don't exist at all, or that having any sense of self is just a delusion we need to get rid of entirely.
But that wasn't his point.
Not quite. He didn't deny that we experience a sense of self. His argument was really twofold. First, that the self is misapprehended. We see it as much more solid and permanent than it actually is.
Okay.
And second, that it's fabricated by the mind. It's an epiphenomenon.
An epiphenomenon, like what?
Like the smoke coming from an engine. The smoke is real. It exists because of the engine's activity, but it's not the engine itself. It's a byproduct.
So it's not that I don't exist, but that the I think I am is constructed. It emerges from other things.
Exactly. It emerges from what you perceive, feel, think, become aware of. But we tend to solidify this emergent process, mistake it for a permanent, independent entity. Our source calls this reification.
Reification. Making something abstract concrete.
Right. We create this self as noun, a fixed thing.
And that's the problem. Believing in this noun self.
The Buddha suggested it leads to trouble, yeah. Because once the self is a noun, it starts taking ownership of things. My feelings, my thoughts, my possessions, my experiences.
And ownership brings anxiety.
It brings a whole world of attendant anxieties. If happiness is a thing you have or don't have, you worry about getting it, keeping it, losing it. All these proprietary objects, tangible or not, suddenly need protecting, worrying over. And that creates dukkha.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. The Buddha used metaphors again, didn't he? To explain the self as a process, not a thing.
Powerful ones. He'd say yourself is more like a river or maybe a blazing fire. It has an identity, you can point to it, but it's never the same from one moment to the next. It's constantly changing, flowing.
A river, not a rock.
Exactly. And this lines up incredibly well with modern insights. Thinkers like Gombrich talk about consciousness as this self-generating process with no fixed, unchanging agent at the core, like a fire that just stops when the fuel runs out. There's no fire entity left behind.
So the Buddha was basically offering a better metaphor for the self. Self as a verb, maybe? A wave, not a solid noun.
That's a great way to put it. And this idea of anatta, not self, is tied directly to another core concept, anicca, impermanence. Because everything is constantly changing, nothing can be a fixed, unchanging self.
Which brings us to this idea from the source, the me movie.
Ah, the me movie, yeah.
We're apparently addicted to telling stories starring ourselves. Our fortunes rise and fall with the drama of our personal narrative.
We're absolutely storytelling animals. That's what our minds do. But the insight is there's no solid, essential actor playing the lead role in that movie.
So if there's no fixed actor, what does that mean for our daily dramas? Does knowing this help? Can we step out of the movie?
I think it can, yeah. Even temporarily. When you start to see that the actor in your me movie is more like a role being played by this constantly shifting collection of experiences, the drama loses some of its intense grip.
The stakes feel lower.
Maybe. And language plays a huge role in keeping this illusion going. Wittgenstein famously said, "The sense of a separate self is only a shadow cast by grana."
How does grammar do that?
Well, think about English, other Indo-European languages. They're built around subject, verb, object. There's always an assumed agent, a doer behind the action. This structure makes the concept of not self, where there isn't a fixed doer, really hard to grasp intuitively.
It's baked into how we speak and think.
Deeply baked in. It's like a teacher Shinzen Young mentions, Sasaki Roshi. He would use these unusual phrases like the activity called pine tree or the activity called human being.
Instead of just pine tree or human being.
Right, to constantly emphasize that everything, including us, can be experienced as these ongoing processes, these waves of impermanence, not just static, separate things. Everything is connected in this relational net.
That really challenges our usual way of seeing things. Okay, so if the self isn't this fixed thing and we're caught up in our me movie, what is driving us? What's fueling all this?
Well, the Buddha had another powerful metaphor for that.
Fire.
Everything is on fire.
He said everything is burning, not literally, of course, but with this pervasive, all-consuming, relentless flame within us.
What is that flame?
It refers to the three core afflictions, sometimes called the three poisons.
Mm.
Raga, which is lust, greed, desire, attachment. Dvesha, hatred, aversion, anger. And moha, delusion or ignorance.
Lust, hatred, and delusion, the big three.
They're the fires burning us up, and they're omnipresent. Any contact through our five senses, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, immediately sets off these gears of pleasure or pain, which leads to desire or aversion. It happens constantly. Okay, but here's where our source makes a really fascinating modern connection. The Buddha couldn't have known this, obviously, but evolution.
Evolution, it turns out, is the likely source of these tendencies. They aren't just, moral failings or psychological quirks. They're deeply ingrained evolutionary adaptations.
So, lust and desire, they helped us survive.
Absolutely. Think about it. Desire drives us to seek food, survival, and sex, replication.
Yeah.
We even use fire metaphors for it in everyday language, like you said before. Hot stuff, burning desire, got the hots for someone.
Right. It's embedded in our language. And hatred or aversion.
Same evolutionary roots. Probably helped our ancestors navigate social hierarchies, manage rivalries, defend territory, react to threats. Again, the metaphors. Inflammatory remarks, fiery temper, smoldering with resentment.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the third fire? Moha, delusion, or ignorance? How is that adaptive?
Well, moha might be more of a byproduct of other adaptations that were beneficial overall, but it results in our feelings often being untrustworthy guides.
Untrustworthy. How so?
Because natural selection doesn't prioritize our happiness, does it? It prioritizes survival and reproduction. It wants us to be productive, striving machines.
Not necessarily contented Buddhas.
Not at all. So the anticipation of pleasure is often stronger and lasts longer than the pleasure itself. Think about craving that piece of cake. The wanting is intense. The eating is over quickly. Part of tanha, that underlying thirst or craving, its job description in evolutionary terms, is basically to never be fully satisfied.
Wow. So it keeps us constantly pursuing, reaching, striving.
Exactly. Which was great for keeping our ancestors motivated. But in our modern world, with abundance and complex social structures, these same ancient drives might actually be fueling a lot of our modern dukkha, our anxiety and dissatisfaction.
That's a huge reframing. These aren't personal failings. They're our evolutionary inheritance running a bit wild.
In a way, yes. These fires, these core emotions, they're deep-seated. They're rooted in our biology, our limbic system. So the goal, the Buddhist path suggests, isn't to completely extinguish them. That's probably impossible anyway.
Right, they're part of us.
They're part of the hardware. The goal is more about regulation, learning to work with them, understand them, not be consumed by them, like adjusting the airflow on a fire, maybe turning that raging inferno into the steady, controlled blue flame of a Bunsen burner.
Manage the heat, don't get burned.
Something like that. Don't
Yeah.
let them run the show unchecked.
Okay. So we've got this misapprehended self, this noun self, driven by these ancient evolutionary fires. How does our mind actually put together our moment-to-moment experience? The Buddha had a map for this too, right? The 5 aggregates?
Yes, the 5 aggregates are skandhas in Sanskrit: form, feeling, perception, mental fabrications, and consciousness. This was his breakdown of, well, everything that makes up our subjective reality.
It wasn't just saying you don't exist. He was showing where we mistakenly project a self.
Exactly. These 5 categories cover the totality of subjective experience in any given moment. And when you first look, it absolutely feels like there's a me right in the center of it all, this enduring, essential self experiencing these things.
That's the illusion.
That's the core insight. Upon closer investigation, the Buddha said, this self simply cannot be found within any of these aggregates, or even as a combination of them. His advice was, see everything with perfect wisdom. This is not mine, not I, not myself.
And these aggregates aren't neutral. They lead to problems.
They inevitably give rise to clinging, to grasping. We identify with them, we attach to them, and that attachment, that clinging, is what leads directly to dukkha.
Okay, let's break them down a bit. The first one, form, rupa. Our source connects this to the brain.
Right. Form refers to the material aspect, our bodies, the physical world, but also, crucially, the physical basis of mind, the brain. Everything we do, think, feel is encoded in the brain through physical connections, neurons firing.
And neuroplasticity comes in here. The brain can change.
It's incredibly flexible, yes, that's neuroplasticity, but it's also generally slow to change its deep patterns, which means real change, awakening, shifting these deep-seated habits of mind. It takes arduous, sustained work. You're literally changing brain connections bit by bit.
It's not just wishful thinking, it's rewiring.
It's rewiring, and it's important to remember mental states, memories, feelings aren't stored neatly in single neurons like in the movies. They're distributed across vast networks, ensembles of neurons firing together.
So it's complex.
Very. The brain is the seat of constant change, billions of electrical spikes every moment, yet somehow memory and identity persist. That idea of neurons that fire together, wire together, captures it. It highlights the brain's impermanence, Annika, while also explaining how patterns, our sense of continuity, get reinforced.
Okay, aggregate 2. Feeling, Vedana. This seems straightforward, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral feelings.
That's the core of it, yes, the raw, affective tone of experience. But again, the key is not identifying with it. Feelings arise, they pass away. They aren't me or mine, clinging to pleasant feelings, pushing away unpleasant ones. That's the trap.
Aggregate 3. Perception. It's how we interpret sensory input.
Exactly. Perception organizes and labels sensory information. It helps us process the overload of data efficiently. It categorizes things. Is this safe? Is this food? Is this familiar?
Which sounds useful. Adaptive.
It is highly adaptive, but it comes with significant drawbacks: bias, rigidity, inaccuracy. We perceive things through the filters of our past experiences, our conditioning, our concepts.
So we don't see things as they are.
Rarely. The Buddha taught that perception is not self, it's impermanent, often leads to suffering if clung to, and it's not truly mine. Our experience is always an interpretation, a construction. Some neuroscientists even call it a controlled hallucination.
Controlled hallucination, wow.
Yeah. Our brain makes its best guess based on incomplete sensory data and prior patterns. Pattern recognition is fundamental here. It's like a primitive form of metaphorical thinking, seeing this as like that.
Kids do that all the time, right? Making connections.
Kids are amazing metaphor producers.
Yeah.
Their pattern recognition circuits are wide open, not yet constrained by adult categories. They see novel connections everywhere.
But there's a trade-off. Efficiency versus accuracy.
Big trade-off. Categorization is super efficient for survival, quickly label threat or food. But it cuts off the richness, the uniqueness, the full reality of the experience. We stop seeing the thing itself and just see the label.
That's why art can be powerful. It breaks the category.
Exactly. As the Russian formalist Viktor Shklovsky said, art makes objects unfamiliar. It de-automatizes perception. It makes us actually see again. Remember that quote from My Dinner with Andre about really seeing what's in a cigar store?
It would blow your brains out.
Right, because we normally just filter and categorize instantly. Mindfulness practice, though, allows for these small, incremental shifts in perception. You start noticing the gaps between the raw sensation and your label for it. You can see the world a bit fresher.
Okay. Aggregate 4. Mental fabrications. Sankara. This sounds complicated.
It's a broad category. It includes volitions, intentions, dispositions, mental habits, but crucially, it strongly corresponds to the mind's narrative functions, our storytelling impulse, the activity of the brain's default mode network.
The Me movie director.
You could say that. It's very closely tied to our personal identity, that storied sense of being a person with a past, present, and future, with intentions and plans.
And this has advantages too, presumably.
Huge advantages. Imagination, planning, anticipating the future, remembering the past, learning from mistakes, these are all tied up with Sankara. They allow us to navigate a complex world.
But the downside?
The downside is identifying with these stories, believing they represent a solid, unchanging self, reifying them. Again, back to Wittgenstein. The sense of a separate self is only a shadow cast by grammar. That essential self we feel, it's largely a fabrication, a useful one perhaps, but still a construct, a controlled hallucination applied to identity itself.
And modern neuroscience backs this up. The idea of no central controller.
It really does. The brain isn't one unified general problem solver. It's more like a collection of specialized computational modules, each evolved for specific adaptive functions, finding food, choosing mates, navigating social groups, etc.
And these modules can conflict.
They absolutely can. That's why we sometimes feel pulled in different directions or act hypocritically without realizing it. The truly radical implication, as our source puts it, is that there's no president or king running the show.
No CEO in the head.
Nope. The conscious self, the I we identify with, isn't really in control most of the time. It's often informed after the fact by unconscious processes. It even confabulates and makes up plausible stories to explain actions or feelings whose real origins it doesn't know.
So it's more like a press secretary than a president.
That's a very common analogy now, yes. Its primary evolutionary job seems to be impression management, presenting a coherent story to ourselves and others rather than actually making all the decisions from the top down.
Okay, last aggregate, consciousness.
Minna.
This is the basic awareness, the knowing faculty that arises when sense organ, sense object, and attention come together. Seeing, hearing, tasting, thinking, the bare awareness of these experiences. But like the others, it's dependent on conditions, it's impermanent, and it's not a self. Wow. Okay, so if that's the diagnosis, this wobbly cart, these inner fires, this fabricated driver made of these aggregates, what's the Buddha's cure? How do we true the wheel?
That's where the fourth ennobling truth, or praxis, comes in, the Noble Eightfold Path. It's essentially the Buddha's comprehensive treatment plan for the problem of dukkha and this fundamental misapprehension of the self.
And a key part of this path is overcoming essentialism, that tendency to see fixed essences.
Fundamentally, yes. Our source frames it almost as #ResistEvolution, that universally experienced feeling of having a solid, essential self. It probably helped evolution in some way.
Like tribalism, us versus them.
Exactly. My tribe has a good essence, your tribe has a bad essence. Simple but dangerous. This essentialism causes not just social problems, but also our deep psychological dukkha. We grasp onto a me that isn't really there in the way we think it is.
And mindfulness helps how? By noticing this.
Mindfulness is crucial. By paying close, non-judgmental attention to our experience, including our thoughts and impulses, we can start to deprive modules of the positive reinforcement that has given them power. You see the impulse to grasp or push away, but you don't automatically react. You just observe it.
You break the cycle.
You weaken the habitual reaction. The insight grows. Identifying with these fleeting experiences, taking ownership, this is my anger, this is my happiness, is actually a liability. The antidote becomes curiosity.
Curiosity.
Yes. Instead of automatically reacting, you get curious. What is this feeling? Where is it? How does it change? This curiosity leads to investigation, and that investigation helps contain the impulse, reducing its power over time. It's a conscious choice to step back from our primal evolutionary programming.
Resisting evolution, like you said.
In that specific sense, yes. Our source also talks about language, especially written language, creating this dualism, this separation between us and the immediate experience, the landscape.
How did pre-literate people experience things?
We can only speculate, of course, but perhaps much more immediately. Less mediated by abstract concepts, maybe not feeling so separate from the cosmos, but embedded within it. Pure presence.
I can get back to that.
Meditation offers a way to, as the source puts it, live in both worlds. We don't have to abandon language and concepts, we need them. But we can learn to shift our primary sense of identity away from the story, the sankhara, the me movie, towards the landscape, the direct, raw, pre-conceptual experience.
Closer to that primal presence.
Closer to presence. And as Stephen Hinton suggests, this state of presence is inherently undefended. Why? Because there's no fabricated, essential self that needs protecting, no narrative that needs constant validation.
That sounds peaceful.
It points towards peace. There's that famous dialogue between the Chan master Huineng and his student Huarang. Huineng asks, "What is this?" referring to the nature of reality or enlightenment. Huarang struggles and finally says, "To say it is like something misses the point."
Because naming it puts it in a box, separates you from it.
Precisely. To name an experience, to categorize it, is to instantly move away from its immediacy, to filter it through concepts. It's like the Tao Te Ching says, the named is the mother of 10,000 things, but the unnamed is origin to all heaven and earth.
Or that Li Po poem, gazing at the mountain.
Inexhaustible, this mountain and I gaze at each other, it alone remaining. Just that pure meeting before the mind starts dissecting and labeling. It's about trying to experience each moment in its uniqueness before our automatic categorization kicks in. Just being with the raw experience.
So identity becomes less of a fixed thing and more of A meeting place.
I love that quote from the poet David Whyte our source uses. I must learn to live at a kind of frontier between what I think is me and what think is not me, so that my identity is more of a meeting place, an edge between past and present, rather than an island around which the events of life swirl and move on.
An edge, not an island. That's powerful.
It really is. And this originary moment, this potential for undefended presence, it's constantly being blocked by our deeply ingrained habits of categorical perception and learned reactions.
But the Buddha showed a path, a way through.
He offered profound psychological insights and a very practical path to seeing through the illusion and finding a different way to be in the world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it really feels like the Buddha, when you peel back those layers of religious overlay, emerges as this incredibly astute psychologist.
Absolutely. His insights into the nature of self, the roots of suffering, the way our minds construct reality, they're remarkably resonant with modern scientific understanding, especially evolutionary psychology and neuroscience.
It's quite amazing, really.
It is. And I think the enduring message is that by understanding these mechanisms, understanding how evolution shaped our minds, how we create a sense of self, how we get caught by desire and aversion, we can start to consciously, resist some of that automatic programming.
Loosen the grip.
Loosen the grip on the known, on the fabricated self. And by doing that, we might open up to this more profound, undefended presence in the world, which ultimately is the path to freeing ourselves from that pervasive disease from dukkha.
So here's a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe mull over. As you go about your day today, just notice how much of your mental energy, your daily anxiety, maybe stems from unconsciously defending this fabricated self, this story you tell about who you are.
And what might shift even slightly if you started to hold that identity a little more lightly, if you experimented with seeing yourself not as a fixed, solid island, but more like that fluid, ever-changing meeting place. White described that edge between past and present, constantly interacting with the world